Okay, a little bit of history tonight. More than 100 years ago, the Salt River used to flow naturally year-round. There it is. But in the 1940s, dams were built upstream to prevent flooding, and the salt was diverted to quench the water needs of a growing desert population. So for decades, it looked like this: a mess, an empty, ugly, dry riverbed. So how did we eventually end up with this? Tempe Town Lake, one of Arizona's top tourist attractions and a commercial hub that has generated billions of dollars. Tonight, the story of how it all began. Water, essential to life and perhaps cherished just a bit more in the desert. It's hard to remember a time when Tempe Town Lake wasn't here. It's such a point of pride now. But for much of the 20th century, it was a dusty, dry riverbed dotted with sand and gravel operations and lots of trash. Interrupted by brief periods of intense flooding. Most of the time, though, it looked like this: a barren scar, a civic embarrassment that stretched valley-wide. The Salt River's future changed in an unexpected and dramatic way in the fall of 1966, when a group of fifth-year ASU architecture students on their first day of class were presented with a bold challenge from their professor, Bob McConnell.
He looked at us and then over his shoulder said, "There's the Salt River." But then he added, "What are you going to do about it?" Then he stood up and headed towards the door, which was, now what's happening? He stopped and he turned and looked at us. He said, "By the way, you have 8 weeks."
And we looked at each other like, is he kidding? No, he wasn't kidding.
He walks out?
He walks out.
I know myself, I just was in a little bit in shock, and I sort of looked around the room and everybody was kind of, what the hell?
Here's the original class assignment dated Monday, September 19th, 1966. Project number 1, the Salt River. Professor McConnell writes, "The Salt River Channel presents a great opportunity. Few major cities have such a large-scale, unplanned, undeveloped reservoir of land awaiting the hand of the environmental designer."
So we knew our work was cut out for us there.
Jim Altenstaedter, Jim Scalise, and Gary Musculka were 3 of the 16 students in that class. A class about to change history.
We decided first thing we needed to do, which is the first step in the design process, is understand the problem. So we organized into groups to walk the river.
They took hundreds of photos, rendered countless drawings, even found a pilot to fly over the Salt River to take aerial photographs. And they pored over topographical maps, stumbling upon one that caught their eye.
And one of them was an old map that showed the Rio Salado. And we said, I think that's the name of our project.
Rio Salado was born, and the 16 students were limited only by their imaginations.
We used to say we didn't know what we were doing, which was a godsend, because we might not have made those stretches, into the potential future if we thought there was an obstacle ahead of us.
What was the goal? And the first thing was bring life back to the river, and the way to do that was with the water.
People living here at the time remember the occasional floods that filled the barren Salt River, sometimes cutting the city in half. Every time it happened, there were calls for flood control, and that would be a major piece of the project. But residents also got a taste of what this could become if water were once again introduced.
None of those people had ever seen water in the Salt River. So they found that quite astonishing that water could even be present.
The group of 16 didn't have to worry about budgets or zoning or public hearings. They were tasked to dream, and dream big.
We looked at all the plans of the different waterways. San Antonio and then Venice comes to mind. And we said, this could happen.
And the plans called for developing the entire 40-mile stretch of the Salt River, from Granite Reef Dam west to the Gila River. An interconnected series of locks, parks, recreational sites, and islands, along with housing and businesses. That hasn't exactly happened yet. But the seeds they planted nearly 60 years ago have grown into something remarkable. The scar replaced by a thriving 2-mile-long waterway in the middle of the desert.
I think it's great, and I think it's just too small.
Are you incredibly proud of what you guys came up with and that a lot of it survives and actually is part of this design?
I am, and my hope is that it will continue to develop and continue all the way to the Gulf of Cortez, Gulf of Baja, Sea of Cortez, because it's not an unfeasible project. It's very feasible.
So when you look back there,
Yeah.
you feel pride?
Oh, yeah. Mostly amazement. We were young kids.
Yet much of what those kids, 16 ASU students, came up with in the fall of 1966 survives. They made history and left an indelible mark on the valley.
The 8 weeks that we spent as 16 as one was the best university experience I ever had.
You ever talk to each other and go, God, we did all this and we never got paid for it?
Yeah, I guess so, you know, from that standpoint, but that's funny. But I think you get paid in different ways. And so seeing the success is payment enough.
Well, and they did succeed, and the group, to a man, all 16 of them, give a lot of credit to the dean of the architecture school at the time, James Elmore. The pedestrian bridge that spans the lake is named in his honor. He is considered the father of the Rio Salado project and pushed for its completion for most of his life. It was a remarkable group of people, Christina, who got together and did that. And they got really lucky because they had the right mix of people who really were talented and came up with this idea.
That is so neat.
It's really cool.
And to hear them talk about it, you can tell that they're so proud.
Oh, yeah.
And to see it, oh man, that's really
It,
cool.
it is a point of pride now, and that used to be really an ugly little stretch.
Right.
And so we'll see if they extend it
I
further
hope
west
it
and
does.
further east.
They
It'd be great.
should, yeah.
It'd be great.